Good evening, I'm Joel Flynn in Hong Kong. Welcome to View TV News. Coming up on tonight's show. A mixed outcome for ex-Hong Kong University Student Union head Billy Feng in court for leading protests on campus. Hong Kong's deputy police chief defends the force, saying it's in no way a political tool. And Beijing and Washington failed to agree on steps to reduce US trade deficit with China, raising questions about the future of their relationship. Good evening. Former president of the Hong Kong University Students' Union, Billy Feng, has been convicted of disorderly conduct but acquitted of criminal intimidation after leading protests on campus last year. Feng earlier pleaded guilty to criminal damage and forcible entry into a HKU council meeting on the Sassoon Road campus. Another ex-student union member, Coleman Lee, has also been convicted. They've now been released on bail until sentencing in September after the judge heard their pleas for leniency. Clashes erupted when students tried to block the council members from leaving the building. They were unhappy with the appointment of Arthur Lee as council chairman and had hopes to overhaul the school's governing structure. Hong Kong's first female deputy police chief, Winnie Chiu, has rejected criticism over the force's professionalism, saying it is in no way a political tool. Speaking to reporters for the first time since her promotion earlier this month, the 54-year-old says there is good morale at the police force and that the officers there are determined to serve citizens. Having joined the male-dominated occupation 34 years ago, Chiu says she cares greatly about how officers conduct themselves and that those who break the laws will be swiftly dealt with.
Our society is becoming more complicated, but our job has not changed at all. Our mission is about maintaining law and order and safeguarding life and property. It has been like this since I joined the force 30 years ago.
Veteran US Senator John McCain has a brain tumor and is reviewing treatment options according to his office. Treatment for the 80-year-old may include a combination of chemotherapy and radiation. The tumour was discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot from above his eye. McCain's doctors say he's in good spirits and is recovering well. There's been an outpouring of support for the six-term senator following the announcement. Former President Barack Obama, who McCain ran against in the 2008 presidential race, said cancer doesn't know what it's up against. Don't go on holidays quite yet. That's what US President Donald Trump told his fellow Republican senators after their attempt to replace Obamacare collapsed. Trump's pushing his fellow Republicans to work harder and find common ground in their bid to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, which was a major promise of his 2016 presidential campaign. It comes as the Congressional Budget Office reports that 32 million of Americans could be out of health insurance under the Republicans' latest healthcare plan. It's the second time the right-dominated Senate has failed to reach an agreement. 4 Republicans have turned their backs on the current bill.
We can repeal, but we should repeal and replace, and we shouldn't leave town until this is complete, until this bill is on my desk, and until we all go over to the Oval Office. I'll sign it, and we can celebrate for the American people.
Well, meanwhile, Trump admits he wouldn't have appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General if he'd known Sessions would recuse himself from the investigation into ties between them and Russia. Speaking to the New York Times, Trump said Sessions should never have recused himself from the probe. The ex-Attorney General recused himself in March from the investigation into alleged Russia meddling in the 2016 US presidential election and possible ties between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. Meanwhile, Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., son-in-law and former campaign manager, have been asked to testify before the Senate committees conducting the investigation on July 26th. The trio are the closest associates of the president to be called to face lawmakers about the probe. OK, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. OK, we kick off by taking a quick look at what's been happening on the markets here in Hong Kong today. The remarkable run of consecutive gains for the stock index continued for its 9th day. The Hang Seng Index of leading shares closing at 26,740 points, up 0.25% on the day. That is the 9th straight day of gains for that index. Industrial companies did well overall, while energy companies also benefited from a bounce in oil prices. The Bank of Japan, meanwhile, has decided to maintain its expansionary monetary policy as it pushed back further against its ambitious inflation target. Analysts say the move has underscored concerns that its massive stimulus program will stay in place long after other major central banks have scaled theirs back. For more on this, let's cross over to Mayu Yoshida in Tokyo. Mayu, economic data suggests a reasonably positive picture for Japan, but it's monetary details, isn't it, that are worrying people there?
That's right, Joel. Well, for example, earlier on Thursday, we saw positive export data that showed moderate economic recovery in Japan. But despite some rosy numbers, there is still no sign the inflation rate is rising. In fact, it's still near zero, even after 4 years since the BOJ launched its huge asset buying program. Now, when you take a look back, last year, the BOJ made a bold move to introduce negative interest rates. But investors, shareholders, and analysts gave a thumbs down as negative rates did little to spur credit demand and actually pressured Japanese lenders. But now that the BOJ for the 6th time delayed the deadline again to hit the 2% inflation target, it looks like the central bank became a little bit more realistic. Joel.
Mayu, will the BOJ Governor Haruka Kuroda be coming under any more pressure now to make changes to what some have called a fairly radical monetary experiment that he's undertaken to try and end long-term deflation?
That's right. Well, he made it very clear that he's sticking to the BOJ's 2% inflation target, indicating that delaying the time frame is no defeat for the BOJ. Now, at a news conference later on Thursday, he almost stubbornly reiterated that he'll maintain the target. He also made an excuse that the BOJ is no exception in pushing back their inflation target because central banks in the U.S. and Europe have done so as well. He also said there were risks beyond his control, such as weak oil prices. But as I said, he is becoming a little bit more realistic. One of the reasons is because his term is ending in April next year. Now, by delaying the target deadline again, analysts say Kuroda also acknowledged that it'll take more time to end deflation, probably another few years beyond 2020, because we have a planned sales tax hike in 2019. It's also true that there's mounting pressure on Kuroda to move the BOJ to tighten its policy, especially after today's delay underscored the BOJ's slow progress at a time when other major central banks are heading to normalize their monetary policies after years of stimulus.
All right, Maya, we'll leave it there. Many thanks. One of the big worries for markets and businesses is further strains on Sino-US relations. Washington and Beijing have failed to agree on concrete steps towards reducing the huge trade deficit the US has with China, raising yet more questions about the future direction of the relationship. Dan Epstein sent us this update from Beijing.
Well, the press conference was cancelled and no joint statement was released, which has led many to assume that there was some type of breakdown in the talks, or at least that no meaningful consensus was reached on any of the important topics, which for the USA, of course, is addressing the trade deficit, which stands at about $350 billion. And one of the main ways that we're hoping to do that is to lobby China for greater access to China's market. Now, in the build-up to these talks, China did allow American beef and liquefied natural gas into China, but many in America were hoping that this was just a precursor for more substantive liberalizing of China's market. Now, this hasn't happened, and another approach that is rumored to maybe happen is that America will impose tariffs of its own, in particular on cheap Chinese steel. And when asked after the talks, President Trump said that it could happen. Now, from China's perspective, it's coming up to the 19th Party Congress at the end of the year. And it could be very strategic to look tough on the USA, to be seen to not cave to American interests. It could be more beneficial, more strategic than any sort of trade liberalization at this stage.
Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump has suggested that tariffs could be imposed on steel imports in a move thought to be aimed at China. Trump has long railed against Chinese imports of steel, although it only currently makes up around 3% of the market.
From day one, my administration has been fighting to bring back our manufacturing jobs and to crack down on foreign countries that cheat. Get a lot of them. We will end the theft of American prosperity, and we will stand up for our companies, our factories, and our workers. Is that okay with you, Michael? Good?
Well, US bank Morgan Stanley yesterday beat analyst expectations to post profit gains across its businesses, up 11% overall in the second quarter. The lender will be happy not just about such big numbers, though, but also that it managed to claim yet another trading victory over its rival Goldman Sachs. Rochelle Chen has more.
Morgan Stanley beat Wall Street's profit expectations and reported gains across most of its businesses. One dark spot, bond trading, fell 4%. That's still much less than at other banks, such as Goldman Sachs, which chalked up a 40% drop. Good earnings gave a boost to Morgan Stanley's stock. Through Tuesday's close, it's risen about 7% this year, outpacing the KBW Bank Index. Olivia Aran covers the story for Reuters.
Morgan Stanley actually has a different fixed income footprint than some of the banks. In 2015, at the end of the year, they had dismal performance and they cut 25% of their trading staff and really reduced the amount of assets that they dedicate to trading. So less capital-intensive business, fewer people, and it's paid off really well. They changed their leadership, and they've still been able to, for the last 2 quarters, produce results exceeding that of Goldman, which has more people and more products, bigger footprint.
After the financial crisis, Morgan Stanley's chief executive officer, James Gorman, shifted the bank's focus to wealth management. It's much more predictable business than trading, and it now brings about 50% of Morgan Stanley's revenue.
UK banks, meanwhile, won't be celebrating quite as much. New rules from January could hit their bottom lines, although they'll be saving British consumers hundreds of millions of pounds. The UK's finance ministry has scrapped charges on card transactions, fees that had been labelled as